Well, tonight I wanted to just give an overview of the pro-life philosophy for just a moment. And I think we all understand why it really is necessary to be part of at least a deeper understanding of the concepts which underlie the pro-life movement. The simple answer to that question is that a lot of people get sucked into various opposite positions from the pro-life one for lack of a conceptual system which helps them to understand the pro-life position more deeply. And many people are literally pulled into what I'm going to say is just not necessarily a pro-euthanasia mentality or a pro-abortion mentality, but just pulled into a mentality that at least accommodates those positions very comfortably because they just don't have a really good fix on freedom or a good fix on love or a good fix on purpose in life or a good fix on personhood or a good fix on rights or a good fix on the common good. Oh yes, they do use those terms. And they use those terms frequently enough. But unfortunately, if those terms, right, there's just this huge marketplace of ideas out there. And if those terms are understood in a very superficial way, very good people with very good intentions wind up believing in things that really are not worthy of their hearts or their minds. They just simply don't know what a deeper position might be on these terms. Choice requires knowledge. If someone is going to choose a position freely with depth, they should understand, as it were, the menu, the menu of ideas or interpretations of ideas. And what I'm going to talk about tonight really are three principal ones. There are many more than these, but and I speak to them in this book, but they deeply influence our understanding of abortion, euthanasia, all the life issues, really. One of those terms is personhood, so we're going to just take a look at it for a moment. The second term is rights, inalienable rights in particular. We'll take a look at those for a moment. And then the third is what I'm going to call purpose in life, for lack of a better term, but it sometimes gets translated as quality of life, or sometimes it gets translated as success, or sometimes as self-worth. So this term purpose in life, it can be viewed, as happiness, quality of life, self-worth, etc., success. All of these things are interrelated, but I'll just use the one kind of signal term, purpose in life, or signal phrase, purpose in life. So let's go through these for just a second. I think if we're able to articulate these well to our friends, if we're able to articulate these well for our colleagues, and for our culture, if we're given the opportunity, I think we can win a lot of people over to a pro-life position quite simply because it is a good position, as Aristotle would say, right? There's something in that position that draws us to itself, and people will see fully that this really is a position that will not only enhance them personally, not only a position which will raise their ethics to a level of nobility, but a position really which the culture needs desperately. I don't want to get dramatic, but I'll just even say perhaps even the survival of the culture requires. And so I'll just leave it at that, and let's talk about personhood first, because it is a confusing term. First, some distinctions. Human being, quote unquote, human nature, quote unquote, human person, quote unquote. These are three terms which are used generally interchangeably, frankly, but in philosophy they have vast differences between them. A human being, generally in a technical sense, refers to something which is identifiable as a species, right? It's a species, It has a specific difference from other things in that genre, and the specific difference can be identified either empirically or through some empirical test. Okay, human being, what does it normally mean? It just means something which is metabolizing, it's living, something which has identifiable human-specific difference, which today we would probably call the human genome. A single-celled embryo is very much an identifiable human being in that sense. You can identify the complete human genome. It is metabolism and replicating, as it were, on its own in its cell divisions. It is a human being. Quite simply, it has the genre, it has the specific difference. It is living, and it is specifically human life. Identifiable through an empirical test. Human nature. Human nature is a very different thing, and of course everybody uses it now in a very sarcastic way. You know, how is my human nature? And what they really mean is something terribly fallen, and you could certainly say that. But what I'm also talking about in terms of human nature in a philosophical sense, so removing it from a religious sense or removing it from common parlance for a second, it's that word nature that, used in an Aristotelian or Platonic way. And that means, what is the identifying aspect? What is it, in Aristotle's words, that is its tati ein einai? What it was meant to be. Okay? So nature is kind of a technical term in philosophy, right? Tati ein einai in Greek just means what it was meant to be. And so you try and find this out, says Aristotle, not by looking at appearances, right? Which he would call accidents. So whether it's 6 foot, whether it's green, whether it's, 260 pounds, whatever, right? Appearance is not the way of finding out the nature, the what it was meant to be of the thing. We go to its activities which reveal its powers. So what we want to do is, beyond all appearances, we want to get to its activities. Its activities reveal its powers, and its powers reveal what it was meant to be. Its highest powers reveal what it was meant to be. Now, in a Christian philosophical tradition, I think that people know, right, when Christians are doing philosophy, they're trying to do philosophy in a way that will create a bridge to a world that may or may not be Christian, may or may not even be theistic, right? So we're trying to use a parlance in which we can communicate to somebody without necessarily giving a set of assumptions which, right, they say, well, I don't agree with that assumption, goodbye. End of dialogue. So the philosophical language is attempting then to try and get in there without giving them an assumption that will just turn them off. So the idea for us then is to say, well, what is it about human beings that's readily identifiable? What is it that Plato and Aristotle, 400 years before Christ, simply not, influenced certainly by a Judeo tradition, or, probably more influenced by, the religions of their times, which, by the way, most of them rejected. So what is it that they thought kind of marked out the tati ein einai, the what it was meant to be, the highest powers of an individual that really reveal, its highest nature? And of course they said, it's the transcendentals. The fact that you desire the transcendentals. And Plato and Aristotle identified 4, and the Christian tradition adds a 5th. The 4 that Plato and Aristotle identify are true, good, right? The truth, or the truth itself, goodness, or the good itself, the beautiful, beauty itself, or the one. Okay, and the one would be unity itself, which frequently refers to being itself, which frequently refers to God. Now it turns out that truth, goodness, beauty, and being, or the one, that these 4 transcendentals for Plato, these were amazing things, because these transcendentals can be desired in an unrestricted and unconditional way. So Plato and Aristotle, the most amazing thing about them is we don't just want some truth. We want complete, unconditional, and unrestricted truth. We would frankly like the complete set of correct answers to the complete set of questions. We have an unrestricted desire to know. We have an unrestricted desire for the truth. We want to probe it in its entirety, in its unconditioned nature. And we know, we have an instinct there, so that truth is unconditioned. At the end of the day, truth can stand on its own without any conditions outside itself. And that notion of truth itself, as you know, Augustine identifies this with God. Plato intimates its identity with God, right? But of course, the truth itself, without any conditions attached to it, sounds pretty much like an unconditioned or unrestricted being, which, of course, there can only be one of, and there are many proofs for that. We won't go into that tonight, but it's you that I'm curious about. You, the human person with human nature. You possess a desire for that. And that's a very curious thing. I'm not going to ask tonight, where did you get such a desire? Is there anything in a world conditioned by algorithmically finite structures out there? Is there simply anything in this world of algorithmically finite structures that could implant into you a desire for ceaseless, knowledge until you get to a completely unconditioned knowledge, a knowledge or truth which is not conditioned by anything outside of itself. It is complete in itself because in itself it is a complete set of correct answers to the complete set of questions. It is completely intelligible. Where in the world did you get that? Queried the Jesuit philosopher Bernard Lonergan. And of course it leads him right to God. But not tonight for that. But you do that. You're very odd indeed. Secondly, you don't just desire, some goodness or some fairness. You really desire unconditional goodness or fairness, right? You want it all. You want goodness without condition. You want goodness that's sufficient unto itself. A goodness which is complete in itself. You want goodness or fairness itself. In fact, I'll bet anything your children would like unconditional justice or fairness in their own lives. I've got these little nieces, and they will come up to me, and they will say, "That's not fair," with the lower lip protruding and vibrating. And the reason is, what did they expect? Perfect fairness. And you violated it. What's more curious is, how in the heck did they know what it was so that they could desire it? Plato's question, really. Augustine's question, really. How did they know what it was so that they could desire it in the first place and get so mad at you? Did you teach them what perfect fairness ought to be so that they would get mad at you when you violated it? No. Yet they know. Odd. And then, of course, perfect beauty. Well, you don't have to, right? My little niece is a perfect exemplar of everything, right? I'll just walk up, perfect truth. I don't have to worry. Uncle Bobby, why is this? Oh, because of that. Well, why is that? Oh, because of that. Well, why is that? Finally, you have to go time out because you're in the deepest modes of quantum theory, right? You're overeducated. But even if you gave them an answer to that question, like an exocet missile, they would ask another one. Because they would realize that what I had given them was not complete intelligibility, not a self-sufficient truth that could stand on its own, but only a truth that was conditioned by something outside of itself, which of course posed another question. And my little niece's perfect beauty? Watch any teenager put on the headphones with the music. And it gets turned up and turned up and turned up. What are they looking for? More beauty. Why is it that Mozart's will throw an entire perfectly good musical manuscript into the fire? Please, let me leap in there and get it. Because it wasn't what? Perfect. There was something flawed in it. Why would artists cut off their ears? What is it about more beauty, seeking what? As if a natural scene could get so compounded and beauty could become, as it were, complete in itself. Even natural beauty with the mountains and the skies. And yet we can want more. Something, the next experience around the corner. Right? Another level of beauty. Bring it on. Where did we ever learn about an exemplar that would be so beautiful, so sufficient in its beauty unto itself, that everything else would pale by comparison, so we could become dissatisfied, get this, with a Brahms symphony? Where? You're very odd. See, you desire God too, by the way. You desire perfect being. You desire perfect unity. You desire the perfect home. And of course, that's an entire other sphere. Some place, as it were, which is the absence of alienation, the perfect unity unto itself. And of course, what's the fifth transcendental that the Christians added later on? Love. That love was another thing we desire perfectly and unconditionally. Yes, Jesus taught us that. Didn't emerge really. Plato did write about love extensively. But of course, love as a transcendental is, as it were, very much part of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And of course, Augustine, clearly was very much aware of it. Yeah, have you ever destroyed a perfectly good friendship? Because that person wasn't perfect happiness, perfect home, perfect responsiveness to my every need, perfect, well, as it were, peace. Well, perfect meaning in life. I mean, have you ever just sat there and gotten completely frustrated because a finite human being didn't exemplify perfect love, care, responsiveness, understanding, peace, happiness, meaning, and home? I have. I've done it. But the more curious question is not how to get out of it. That's a very good question. But for this lecture anyway, the more curious thing is what? How did you ever desire that? Where my niece can sit in my lap and look right into my eye and make sure and check that I'm not getting distracted, because it would be a condition to my love, and know very well the second my mind strays. Who taught her that? Not me. Truth, love, goodness or justice, fairness, beauty, being or home. 5 things which human beings desire unconditionally. Now, all I want to say is, that's the highest powers. Why the highest? That's the one thing where we have the capacity to apperceive perfection before it got there so that we could desire it. Where in the heck did we get an apperception, as it were, of that perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being, so that we desire it and wreck our relationships and be dissatisfied with every scientific truth and be, dashed cynics and skeptics and dashed romantics and dashed idealists and then turn into cynics? Where did we get the desire for perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being? Where did we get this? I'm not going to answer that question tonight, but I have a pretty good idea. What I want to call your attention to is this amazed Plato so much that it became literally the source of his proofs for the immortality of the soul in the Phaedo. This was a philosopher not influenced by the Judeo-Christian tradition. What I'm trying to say is, we ought to have the same wonder to this very day, because they exemplify human nature. They exemplify the highest powers that a human being has. If you want to know the tati ani of human beings, then look at those desires for those 5 transcendentals. Look at those desires for the 5 things which can be perfect and unconditional in themselves. And look at our unconditional desire for the 5 things which are perfect and unconditional in themselves. And look at that within the context of your desire for God, because your desire for God is interlinked. And of course, as Augustine says after his conversion, right? Well, what is perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being? Why, they are all the same, in the same being, God. Late, he says, late have I loved thee, O beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved thee. What is my point? That's human nature. Now, as Lonergan said at one point, when animals run out of biological opportunities and dangers, biological opportunities, you know what those are, right? You pet the dog likes the petting, it becomes a biological opportunity responsive to the dog's instincts, biophysical, right? Reactions are occurring, the dog is happy, and then, of course, food, right? It's a good biological opportunity, keeps the dog alive, right? Biological danger, lion walking down the path, don't like that, run away, right? When an animal runs out of biological opportunities and dangers, you know what they do? They fall asleep. It's very interesting. Stop petting, stop feeding, stop endangering. Human beings don't. They grow dissatisfied with every imperfection in every one of the 5 transcendentals and move from every state of boredom and frustration to creativity and elation. Human beings transcend not only biological opportunities and dangers, they transcend the algorithmically finite structures of the world in which they live, and that is why their desire to know and love is unconditioned and unrestricted by its very nature. That's human nature. Nothing less. Now, why is this so important? Because the underestimation of human nature can cause an undervaluation of the human being. Remember the human being, right? That empirically identifiable subject, right? If you under-identify, if you underdefine the nature of the being that you're talking about in that species, right? If you underdefine it, you could undervalue it. If you undervalued it, you could do something terrible, something tragic with respect to that underdivine being. Can you imagine treating that being that quests the 5 transcendentals, that has this, as it were, desire to move to the very divine itself? Can you imagine treating that like mere matter, like a mere chemical substrate, like something inert, that it would have the same value as a plant? When animals run out of biological opportunities and dangers, they fall asleep. Human beings don't. They quest the 5 transcendentals right, in my Christian faith, into the heart of God. So that's the first thing. We need really, what do we do with human, right, with the pro-life movement? One of the first things we have to do, honestly, is to get people to value themselves aright. Because if people don't have a very good sense of human nature, if they don't know the transcendentality of their nature, the mystery of their nature, the intrinsic dignity of their nature in that transcendentality, the intrinsic lovability of that nature in its transcendentality, imagine for a moment not appreciating that. They wouldn't appreciate it in others, and they wouldn't even appreciate it in themselves. An abject delimitation of the lovability of themselves, leading to a delimitation of the lovability of others, and of course, the rest is history. When I say passionately, I really mean we as pro-life people, we've got to just say, look at yourself. You're not just weird. You are actually a quester of unconditional truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. Wow, you're transcendental. And quite, by the way, quite mysterious in that. You're not inert matter. Human person. A human person is generally calling forth for an evaluation of the nature. So there's what you're talking about is there some intrinsic or extrinsic worth or value, or in Christian terms, dignity in this being that we're talking about, this being with this transcendental nature. Now, sometimes when we talk about person, we really mean that in the sense of deserving of love, deserving of compassion, deserving of care, or deserving of respect, right? So personhood always has that deserving in front of it, right? When we take it into the context of the law, however, it generally it's taken out of that more emotive context, or that loving context, or that compassion context, or that respect context, and is put into the context of law and rights, deserving of protection under the law, deserving of protection toward its fulfillment, deserving of protection of its self-determination. So it's deserving, all right, but it's deserving of something in the social order, deserving of something in the society. So personhood then is, well, giving just deserts, recognizing just deserts. Now, in our society, this idea of personhood really does represent deserving of rights, or a rights holder, right? And I'm going to talk about this term rights in my second part of the talk tonight out of 3 parts. But the key thing to remember right now is, a human person a person really means deserving of rights in the social or legal context. In the interpersonal context, deserving of love, deserving of care, deserving of respect, deserving of compassion. Okay, in the interpersonal context. Let's stick for a second with what we're talking about, just the legal context here, deserving of rights. Here is what the pro-life position holds. All human beings, that is to say, all beings belonging, either identifiable either by the fact that they came from human parents, all human beings having this specific genome, or having these human parents that belong to this species, that have this specific difference of humanity, and we're going to just say, should be considered to have a human nature. So the pro-life position is going to say, we shall consider all human beings, those beings belonging to this species, to have a human nature. What kind of human nature? A transcendental human nature. That is to say, a human nature that desires and has the awareness sufficient to have a desire for unconditional and perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. That's what we're saying. And because we're going to consider that, we're going to say that every human being who has that human nature will have to be considered a human person deserving of rights and protections under the law. Now, why consider every human person, every human being, to have a human nature, a transcendental human nature, which in turn has this dignity, or this human personhood? Why? Because it's the only way that we will ever achieve any form of civilization whatsoever. If you assume the contrary, the only possibility is a violation of the silver rule. And the silver rule is absolute ethical minimalism. In other words, any departure from a universal, and we'll talk about this incredible guy who's starting in 1511, right? Bartolomé de las Casas was trying to liberate the Indian slaves in South America from the conquistadores, from slavery, already elicited all of the principles that stand behind this. But let's just take a look at it for just a moment. And why do you have to put a universal? All human beings have human nature. You just have to consider it so. All people with human nature have to be considered human persons, and therefore deserving of protection and maintenance of their rights under the law. The very minimum. Why? When Bartolomé de las Casas was debating with another fellow by the name of Sepulveda, this debate before the High Council in Spain got very animated. And Sepulveda said, no, he said, I believe in Aristotle's doctrine of natural slavery. And he made his argument on the basis of natural slavery. And he said, see, there are some beings that are inferior to other beings. And you can tell by the level of their development and the level of the organization of their societies, you can tell one group is inferior to the other group. And Bartolomé de las Casas said, no, he said, you can't really do that. Because he said, what you really have to look at is what those human beings are capable of. And he called it capable of unstinted growth to what they were meant to be. Unstinted growth into what they were meant to be. That's the way you have to analyze it. So he said, you just can't take this group's culture at this point in time and go, aha, their level of technology is very inferior. Therefore, they are very inferior. He says, that's a non sequitur, right? Does not follow. He says, what you really have to do is say, no, given the opportunity to grow, could this culture emerge just as technological, I'm just using technology, it could be anything, right? But just as technological proficient as this other culture, and therefore be deemed not to be inferior? And the answer is, of course, yes. And therefore what? It does not follow that the level of development is equatable with the culture. It does not follow that the level of development is equatable with the person. It does not follow that the level of development is equatable with the nature, said Las Casas. And he passionately argued for this. Now, of course, I'm not saying that he won or lost, but I mean, it's because it was a debate that went on right almost for 300 years until abolition has finally, took root. But the point is, for the pro-life movement, well, why wouldn't you consider, for example, why would you consider, that every human being has got to be considered to have a human nature, which is of human person? Because we're judging it not on the level of its development. I don't care if it's a single-celled embryo. If it has the capacity, as it were, if it is a human being, which by definition is the capacity to have its tati ani, if it has that capacity, then, as Las Casas said, and I believe this, you have to honor it. You have to say, yeah, it's a non sequitur to suggest that the person is defined, the culture is defined by its level of development. It must always be defined by what it was meant to be. And said Las Casas, and therefore we must foster by the method which is appropriate to human beings, namely love and goodness and kindness, foster it to that level of development of what it was meant to be. The same thing holds true in the pro-life movement today. The relationship between the slavery issue and the pro-life issue is uncanny. The removal of personhood, the removal of rights, the non-objective ordering of human rights, the purpose in life problems, all, you just see them again and again, going all the way back to 1511, going back to the discovery of the New World, going back to all the writings that are going back and forth, right? Between, Sepulveda and Las Casas in the 1500s. I mean, it's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. Now, what's my point? My point is even stronger. It gets down to this thing called the Silver Rule. I think everybody knows the golden rule in this room. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is ethical maximalism. Right? When Jesus said that, when he removed the knots, as it were, that was do the good for others that you would want done to you. The Silver Rule is mere ethical minimalism. Every culture has had the Silver Rule, north, south, east, west. Every religion has had the Silver Rule in one form or another, north, south, east, and west. And it's the one with the knots in it, as you know. Do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you. Do not do a harm to others that you would not want done to you. Or put another way, don't do any avoidable harms. And if a harm is literally unavoidable, I have to lay somebody off at Gonzaga University, I don't know. If a harm is unavoidable, minimize it. Now, for every ethical writer that I know of, and by the way, this holds true for utilitarianism as well as deontology, right? You don't have to be a principle-based ethicist. You don't have to be a virtue ethicist. You don't have to be a natural law theorist. All you need, just utilitarianism is just fine. Because what is the key principle of utilitarianism, right? key principle of utilitarianism is do no unnecessary harms. And if you're a social utilitarian, optimize the good. But do no unnecessary harms. That's it. That's all you need to do. So should this be universally applicable? Yes, I think it should. I think it should. Now, moving back for a second, what I want to do then is trying to get now underneath that. Why make this ethical minimalism? Because without that principle, even as Jeremy Bentham recognized, there could not even be the equivalent of a collective kind of momentum to do right. That there couldn't. It's that without which there is no ethics. It is that without which there is no social responsibility. If somebody comes up to you and says, I really feel the need to do unnecessary harms to people in order to be fulfilled, my thought is, run, Bambi, run. Because you're dealing with a sociopath. The point is, the silver rule is the one condition of civilization. It's the minimum condition of civilization because it is the minimum condition of social ethics. It is the minimum condition of a social contract. It is the minimum condition of a positive legalistic system. It is the minimum condition of a non-conscience-based ethics. It's just the minimum condition. What is the point that Las Casas is trying to make? If we make the error, this is 1500s, right? If we make the error of underdefining a human nature, if we make the error of calling at least only one human being to be not a human person, to be subhuman, to be sub-person, to be, as it were, lower than this human nature. If we mistake it just once, said Las Casas, then we have committed an atrocity. We have literally opened up the being in question for, as it were, sanction. We have opened up the being in question to be killed under the sanction of the law. Las Casas said, this is what's going on to the Indians. This is intolerable. You're not just taking the Indians' liberties, their self-determination. Las Casas said, you're taking their lives. You've got them misclassified. You are mistakenly identifying their natures with their current state of development. You're mistakenly identifying their natures with, even more horrendously, the current state of their cultural development. This guy says, it's such an incredible error. It's such a non sequitur with such vast consequences, he said. Stop it, he argues before the King of Spain. Now, if you look at it, that is what we are dealing with. We are right back to the mid-1500s. We are right back fighting for our cultural soul. It is a debate between Sepulveda and Las Casas once again. Because even though, we're looking at it from a higher viewpoint up here, right? Seems a little ethereal up there in the clouds. What are we dealing with in question? We're dealing with one simple principle. Are we willing to tolerate, as a culture, are we willing to tolerate the non-identification of all human beings with human nature and human personhood? Are we willing to create a separation in principle? Is there some being, some human being that does not qualify for human personhood? Said Las Casas, the violation of the silver rule can be so profound. It's not just the annihilation of one person, although that would be bad enough. It is literally, it could lead to the annihilation of a whole group of people. And of course, that was affecting Las Casas very much, right? It was literally leading to the annihilation of whole groups of people. Okay. So, I leave you, first thing, personhood. This is big. It's a huge term, deserving of protection, a rights holder, which is identifiable with the human nature, which is identifiable with the human being. I think there's only one plausible position which can help us to avoid this egregious culpability with respect to the silver rule. And that is, as Las Casas says, you have to put the word all in front of it. All beings of human origin, all human beings have a human nature, are human persons, and deserving of rights and protection under the law. If we deny the universality of it, there are two other consequences. It's not just the potential egregious of a violation of the silver rule, but also it has huge cultural violations. Because then people try to vie for the definition of personhood. We put the definition of personhood into the cultural arena. We try to then decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die. And here's the second consequence, on the basis of a subjective criterion. There's only one criterion we have that's objective for human personhood, and that's human being, or human existence, or belonging to this human species. That's all we've got that has any kind of objectivity or objective empirical identifiability. That's it. Everything else is up for grabs. An IQ of 140? Getting pretty high up there. I may not qualify. 6'2", I'm dead. Right? Whatever it may be. If we try to find another criterion aside from human existence, it is a subjective criteria, and that subjective criteria, of course, puts into our hands what we, of course, would consider to belong to God alone. The power to decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die on some other criterion than their mere human existence. 1500s. We're right back there. Went a little over time on that one. Let's go to the second one very quickly. Rights. It's a huge term. To make a very long story short, there was a Jesuit, by the way, Las Casas was a Dominican. But I have the one solace of the Jesuits weren't around in those days. So had to be done by a Dominican. Just kidding. Okay. There's another Jesuit, another religious by the name of Francisco Suarez, who in 1620 wrote a book called De Legibus. And what Suarez had done was he fashioned a term called jus out of the term justitia. So he just, as it were, took the particle jus and he made it a property of a human person. This had not been done before. Remember, justice or justitia, right? Justice is the right relationship between human beings. So in justice, I walk up to you and I say, well, okay, I want to have a just relationship with you, so I ought to give you what you deserve. If you worked 5 hours, I should pay you for 5 hours. I should give you a just wage, right? So it's a relationship issue. What Suarez did, and remember, Suarez, just as, by the way, Las Casas was influenced by Erasmus's In Praise of Folly, and also he was very much influenced by Thomas More's Utopia. So there's a humanistic streak in Las Casas. In Suarez is probably influenced by Las Casas. Unimaginable. A Spaniard living, within a proximity of Las Casas. Las Casas so famous in the Spanish court. Suarez was a lawyer before he became a Jesuit. Some people may view that as a good turn of events. But the thought is, of course, he was a lawyer before he became a Jesuit. And then, of course, he writes, about this term. And he's operating with this metaphysical system, which is very individualistic, right? So atoms are starting to come into play in culture. Individualism is starting to come into play in the 1600s, right? And so by the time Suarez gets a hold of it, he's really not so much concerned with the right relationship, although that's really important. You can't forget justice, ever. But what Suarez is trying to do is prevent a travesty, for example, that could happen to the Indians or could happen right in the reductions in Paraguay and Bolivia, right? So he's trying to prevent this from happening. A genocide, literally a genocide from happening. So he's thinking through this thing. And in De Legibus, he says, no, he says, there is something that is absolutely fundamental which belongs to every human being. And he says it's a universal obligation of everybody to that being. In other words, what Suarez did was he took it out of the relationship, which is between you and me in the center here, right? And he invests it into individual, and he says, you own, you possess inside your being the very obligation of everybody else to allow you to reach your tati ein. This is a colossal leap. Okay? In other words, your tati ein, what you were meant to be. Your desire, right? To pursue, right? Truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. On an unconditional and perfect level. And of course, there are some conditions to that. You can't go around killing off other people's tati einais. You can't go around killing other people, which would of course prevent them from getting... So of course you can be restrained if you're doing things that are of that sort. But in essence, if you are using your gifts properly, you ought to have sufficient life, sufficient self-determination, which is what in the philosophical term, right, what they're meaning by at that point, right, liberty or freedom, and sufficient means or property to be able to pursue that. You ought to have that. Now, Suarez does not go into the detail of John Locke, later on to Thomas Jefferson. But the key thing I want you to see right now is just simply this. What Suarez has done is he has not only taken the universal property of, personhood, a las casas. He's also invested it in the individual, and he says it belongs to you by your very nature. The fact that you have a nature that desires perfect love, truth, goodness, beauty, and being, you have an obligation of people not to prevent you from doing that unless you are doing something which is inhibiting somebody else's rights. Okay, now, I'm giving probably Suarez too much credit than what he actually did. But that's where he was going. And the key thing that I want to say tonight is simply this. We cannot lose that concept. Because what John Locke realizes is that in Suarez, you have a way of getting rid of a tyranny of the majority. Where theoretically 51% could outvote the other 49% about their lives. So the key thing to recognize is, what's so great about rights theory? Well, it recognizes the true worth of another human being, the true transcendental worth, truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being of another human being. But in addition to that, what it also recognizes is the intrinsic dignity. You have, by your very nature, a universal obligation that is owed to you by everyone, not given by the government, don't you see? It belongs to you. You possess it. The universal obligation is inside of you. No government gave it to you, and therefore what? No government can take it away. Las Casas had already done this. By 1540, Las Casas had already, implicitly done it. He didn't use the word rights. He didn't use the word use as Suarez had done it. But Las Casas had done it. And he said, therefore, all power is derived from the people. And therefore, every ruler who has power must have it on the basis of the consent of the people. And therefore, says Las Casas, every time a ruler passes something, it must be done with the consent of the people. This is democracy a right. Rights first, power and vote derivative upon the inalienable, the intrinsic rights that belong to you by your very nature, not bequeathed extrinsically by a government. That is the key. If this is understood, then of course a tyranny of the majority is just simply impossible. 51% cannot outvote your right to life. 51% cannot outvote your right to liberty. 51% cannot outvote your right to have properties necessary for your liberty and your life. They can't. Because all power is derived from and meant to promote your life and your liberty. It cannot be inconsistent. It's the right ordering of things. Now, if you're following me here for a second, you can see how right back we come to the abortion problem. It's not just the slavery problem. It is also the abortion problem. And as we'll see in a moment, it's the euthanasia problem. Let's suppose we have, a Supreme Court that they could actually say, well, yeah, we think it is possible that a person's right should be defined by the court itself. So let's suppose the Supreme Court for a second says human existence alone, human beingness alone, belonging to the species alone, the only objective criterion that there is, that's insufficient for the determination of human personhood, or it's insufficient for the determination of the existence of rights. Do you see what just happened in that logic? Why would Las Casas, Suarez, and Locke, and Jefferson be rolling over in their graves, in my opinion? I think what we are dealing with here very simply is this. We are dealing with, accidentally, I don't think the court went around and deliberately tried to do this, but I do think it did in fact happen. The court gave itself the power to veto an inalienable right in a human being, a universal obligation owed it by every other human being, including, I hate to say this, by its mother. It's owed by its very nature, by his very nature, her very nature. And what happened was, the moment somebody said, well, that definition of when life begins, or that definition of when personhood begins, that could be the first trimester, second trimester, third trimester, whatever. It doesn't matter. The minute you say it, already the harm has been done. Because the intrinsic right, the right that belongs by very nature, has been turned into an extrinsic right, a right that is given by a government or a governmental body. And of course, that is the crime. I don't want to use that of the court. But for our system which believed in those rights, not just in the slavery issue. And by the way, we didn't always believe in those rights in the slavery issue. Just read that Dred Scott decision. Holy smokes, did we not believe in that? But we should have. Would have prevented a lot of trouble and a lot of injustice. But that's another story. But the key thing that I want to get to is, yeah, therein lies the problem. There's only one objective criterion for when rights inhere in a human being. And that's human existence. Everything else is bogus. Everything else has to be subjective. Everything else is subject to human folly, human pretense, human arrogance, human mistakes. Everything else is bogus. Enough said. But it gets even deeper, this rights theory, if I might just get one more thought in here, and that is the objective ordering of rights. When Suarez or Locke or Jefferson talked, basically they always kind of said life, liberty, and then some other thing, property, pursuit of happiness, whatever. But the key thing is life and liberty. Let's just take those two biggies, those kind of universal agreement. But it's always said in that order. Now, nobody ever said why they put it in that order, but I think Immanuel Kant gives us at least some insight into why that is so through a criterion called the condition necessary for the possibility of. I'm just going to call it the necessity criterion for just a second. And what I want you to see, as people who are involved in the pro-life movement, we need to make sure this necessity criterion is used because, once again, it's the only objective criterion we have. Necessity. So let's take a look at it. Any right which is necessary for the very possibility of another right must be considered the more fundamental right. The one that wins the rights conflict. Okay? So let's suppose you have a dispute between a life right and a liberty right. If you have a life right, say, of the fetus, you have the liberty right of the mother. Let's suppose that. Put it into the terms that at least an opponent of mine would use. If that is the case, we have to err in favor of the life right. Why? Because it is the most fundamental right. Why? By the necessity criterion. Why that criterion? It's the only objective one we have. See, life has to be more fundamental than liberty because, of course, if you're dead, your liberty rights are a moot question. The same holds true, by the way, with the slavery issue. White man's burden, remember? The same thing holds true with the slavery issue. When the audacity of the courts to permit somebody else's freedom, i.e. enslavement, to be conditioned by another group's property rights. And at the end of the day, the court ruled in favor of the white man's property rights over the liberty rights of a group of people? They did. That was fundamentally against the necessity criterion. Why is it against the necessity criterion? You see, if you get to own all your property, but I get to own you, I own your property. Your property rights are a moot question. Now, of course, there's justice issues involved in this, but the key thing that I want you to see, and I know we need to get to our questions and our various and the purpose in life curriculum, but I think I'm just going to summarize by saying, I think what we have to do as pro-life advocates is four things. In a very, right, using Las Casas' words, right, in the method appropriate to human beings, we must use love and goodness and kindness, not Spitzerian bloviations. To do what? Number one, optimally define human nature. We have to. We have to define human beings in terms of their highest nature. They're what they were meant to be. Number two, we can never allow a being's state of development, a human being's state of development, to be determinative of its nature. We must always look at it in terms of its arrival. Just like cultures and slavery in Las Casas. Thirdly, we must, if in doubt, always err in favor of according rights and personhood to human beings, rather than not according rights and personhood to human beings, because the consequences of that are an egregious violation of the silver rule, possibly even leading to genocide, which has happened in our history. An egregious violation of ethical minimalism, an undermining of the culture's possibility of ethics. A la Las Casas again. Fourthly, the objective criterion. I think what we need to do is use the necessity criterion in the evaluation of the fundamentality of rights. Everything else is merely subjective. Now, I know I got impassioned there, but I want to say I am impassioned because I think it's important. I think it's important enough to show passion about. But at the same time, I think we must be utterly respectful to everyone who has an alternative position, such that with love and goodness and kindness, we can move their hearts to the high-mindedness of what Las Casas and Suarez held out for us 500 years ago. 400 and 500 years ago. Purpose in life, real quickly. This book has all the details on this. This is more important for the question of euthanasia than it is for abortion, but it is very important for the question of abortion because whether you're level 3 or level 2 will tell you how you're going to view personhood, essentially. You know, as I went through pretty much intellectual history, I tried to identify people who had various systems, right? Levels, modes of being. And I tried to, so you could take somebody like the tripartite soul of Plato, you take Augustine's Confessions. You take St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles on happiness, right? You take Kohlberg's, 7 stages of moral development. You take Carol Gilligan's corrective to that, feminist correction to the 7 laws. You take, whatever you want to take, right? Anybody, Gabriel Marcel, the Catholic, Karl Jaspers, the Protestant, Max Scheler, the Catholic, Paul Ricoeur, the Protestant, Martin Buber, Jewish philosopher. Anybody who's got stages, right? You just take a look at it and you say, well, what's common to all these philosophers who are trying to analyze happiness or human purpose in life? What is common to them is 4 things, at least that I've derived. The most basic and fundamental level is what I'm just going to call level 1 for short. That level 1 is just a very basic physical stimulated happiness. Okay? I see the bowl of linguine, I lunge toward it, or the Arby's turkey sandwich, as the case may be. I lunge toward it, I wolf it down, of course. I go, yum, I'm happy. The thing is, with each of these levels of desire or happiness, you can live for them. The minute you call them your most important identity feature, they are your meaning and purpose in life. Okay? The moment you kind of accede to one of them as more important than the others, you've got your identity right there. You've got your meaning and purpose. It's going to start determining your goals in life, your relationships, what you're looking for in relationships, your whole sense of yourself, your sense of self-worth, as we'll see, your definition of love, your definition of freedom. Everything is going to follow from this. Everything. Quite literally. The key thing is, level 1, immediately gratifying, surface apparent, and intense. The 3 advantages to level 1. No delay in gratification. Gosh, I don't have to study, be subtle, or anything. I can eat a bowl of linguine and be happy. And finally, of course, it's intense. It just holds my attention. As you move up the scale, you'll see something. You've got a vapidness of what? Pervasive, enduring, and deep on level 1. It's not very pervasive meaning in life. A bowl of linguine doesn't go very far. It's not very enduring. It does not last very long. And it is not very deep. It does not make use of your highest psychological powers, your highest creative powers, your powers of moral reasoning, your spiritual powers, your powers of love. It doesn't make use of any of it. Okay, what's my point? My point very simply is, right, it's got some intensity, surface apparentness, but lacks the other. Level 2, most important for our culture, ego gratification. Okay? We have self-consciousness. The moment we have self-consciousness, we divide the world in 2. The out there and the in here. I've got my inner universe, right? Self-consciousness means my awareness of my awareness. By the way, you're also aware of your self-awareness. You can do a triple. You can not only get yourself getting the clock, you can get yourself getting the clock. Get back on yourself twice. And that makes you self-aware. You're aware that you are self-aware. Now, the minute you get an inner universe, right? The inner universe is a very nice thing to have. Okay. There's the outer universe. And of course, that means I've got 2 ways to relate to the outer universe. I can try and bring the outer universe into my dominion, right? I can bring it inside. I'm going to call that level 2, ego gratification. Or I can invest my inner universe. I can invest my time, my talents, and my energy in making a positive difference to something or somebody beyond me, right? I can invest in the outer universe. So I can give myself to the outer universe, or I can bring the outer universe into the dominion of my inner universe. Okay, now, make a long story short. Here is the key. If you go level 2, that's the first way. I'm going to bring, right? That's not necessarily bad. You have to do some of that. You have to be the master of some things in your outer universe. Otherwise, civilization simply will not progress. But if you live for it, it becomes really bizarre. Let me give you an example. What are some of the ways in which, right, you get your level 2 satisfactions, your ego satisfactions, your comparison satisfactions, your comparative advantage satisfactions? How do you get them? Those level 2, bring the outer world to me. You can get it through achievement. That's always healthy, right? I can do more today than I could do before. I feel happy. Don't you feel happy? Sure you do. You feel more self-empowered. Great. Self-empowered. Okay? That word self is key. Number 2, winning. Always a good way. I beat you at chess. I feel happy. And parenthetically, you do not. It's very simple. Okay? You lost. You feel deprived. Number 3, status, accolade, admiration, respect, esteem, popularity. Spitzer, you have achieved much, and you play chess expertly. Thank you very much. Would you please keep talking? I'd like to hear a little bit more about that subject. Okay, right? Get an increase in stats, obviously. But you still need it. It's not bad. I mean, we're hardwired for this because there's something good, appertaining to it. 4thly, power and control. Okay. Give me power, give me control. Give me comparative power and control. Well, maybe. Okay. Now, where does it go awry? When you live for it as an end in itself. When it is the only thing that makes life worth living. When we forget about level 3 and level 4, then it really goes awry. And of course, if level 2 goes right, the only thing that matters is winning. If the only thing that matters is status, if the only thing that matters is achievement, if the only thing that matters is power and control, at the end of the day, here are the symptoms. Jealousy, fear of failure, contempt, right? The winner feels contempt of other people. But of course, contemptuous people are always lonely because people are poised for flight. Oh, and then you get all the ego games, right? Ego sensitivities, right? Spitzer, I don't believe you made that move. I could see 3 moves ago that if you did that, you would have lost the game. And look, you lost. Okay? And the daggers are, right? If you're living for level 2, right? The daggers are killing you. Your identity is vaporizing. You can't move another chess piece for 20 years because you're so, right? And Spitzer, that word is pronounced spectroscopy, and you pronounced it spectroscopy, and now people think you're appallingly ignorant and a consummate idiot. Okay. And you agree with it, and then you go home at night and have suicidal feelings because you've made such a consummate idiot out of yourself. You get the point. But what I'm trying to say is, ego-sensitive winners do not escape. Right? And so there's this odd life we live, right? Of these high highs, low lows, contempts and loneliness, right? Ego sensitivities and ego gratifications, superiority, inferiority. There's highs of fears of failure, suspicion. You're trying to steal my glory, but you will not get into my spotlight, and I will take care of that swish. You get the point. The point I'm trying to get to with the dramatic presentation is level 2 is our culture's bane. Because it has become literally an end in itself in the lives of so many people. And that jealousy, fear of failure, ego sensitivities, all those things. And I've been there. I've done it. I stand in the front of the line. Just the other day, a colleague came in, told me, right, my book is ready to be published. Mine's still away, still at that Notre Dame press. The dagger goes in my heart in abject jealousy. The Roman car ain't going to save me. It's there. It's in our culture, right? Level 3. Level 3 is your salvation. If you want to get out of the comparison game, you want to get out of the ego gratification, you want to stop turning ego gratification to an end in itself, level 3. Because it's the opposite. I want to make a difference with my life. I do not want to get to 80 years old and think to myself, what was the difference between the value of my life and that of a rock? And have to say, well, nothing. That would be incipient despair. No, it'd be full-blown despair. That's what it would be. Right? My life means nothing. What did you do with your life? What difference did your life make? What worth did it have in the world? Some little love for some little person? Some great book for some group of people? Did it make it? No, basically a rock. You would be, right? So what is our opposite tendency? We'd like to make an optimal difference. We really would. If you want just a great book on this, read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. Written in a concentration camp during World War II. Just read that book. Because, right, two kinds of prisoners. I don't have to tell you the story. One kind of prisoner is focusing on level 2. The other kind of prisoner is focusing on level 3. The level 2 prisoners, literally, who had all their level 2 and level 1 taken away from them, right? Because there's no ego benefits in the camp. What happened to them? They literally set all their stakes on the Allies will liberate us by Christmas. When the Allies didn't liberate them by Christmas, they died. Meaning matters. But the level 3 prisoners, the ones who thought, if I get out of this prison of war camp, if I get out of here, I'm never going to let this happen again, right? So they start living for a future. I got to find my kids, and I got to, and I'm going to live for my family. And they start, this other prisoner needs my help, and keep me alive today, right? I'm going to make a difference to that person. They lived, they had meaning, and they went on to do terrific things with their lives. That's it. What's my point? Level 3. We want to optimize it. And the more we want to make a difference with our lives, our time, our talent, and our energy, the higher we get. Level 4. Remember those transcendentals I started this whole discussion with? Well, that's level 4. Level 4 is the ultimate. Level 3 is the contributive. Level 2 is the ego comparative. And level 1 is the physical external. That level 4, the ultimate, can be manifest in 2 ways. Number 1, the platonic way that I talked about at the very beginning, right? I have a desire for unconditional and perfect truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. And just watch me manifest it as my lower lip quivers when something is unjust. As I just am completely annihilated by the fact that the formulas of physics cannot explain the entire physical universe. There's a little joker called the Heisenberg indeterminacy principle, right? Not just uncertainty, indeterminacy in nature. Arg, right? And then, of course, no human system of justice can ever bring about complete ideal utopia. Arg! And then, of course, every human beloved that I have is always disappointing and acting like a human being with conditioned reactions and doesn't understand me perfectly. Arg! You don't think you have this? You have this. And the point that I'm trying to get to is, if we have it, it's not just how do we get it. What's even more fascinating is you can stake your whole identity and meaning in life on it. As Augustine said in the end, right? For thou hast made us for thyself. Right? Because God alone could give ultimate and unconditional truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. He alone could be self-sufficient truth, love, goodness, beauty, and being. Without any further condition, without any further imperfection in himself such that it would lead to another question or lead to an imperfection leading to a higher form of beauty or goodness or love. That alone. And then he said, for thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. You can live for God. Now what's my point? It is incumbent upon us as people in the pro-life movement. We have to help people to see, you can't just stop level 2. This is part of our ministry. You can't just stop. Have you ever tried to do that? Okay, I'm not going to compare myself to anybody today. I won't have a dagger go in my heart because the other guy's book got written before mine. I will not be jealous of this person who is stealing my glory right now by saying these things. I'm not going to be egosensitive. I won't, even though that guy doesn't respect me and doesn't like my chest game, I'm going to kill him. And then, right? Have you ever tried that? I'm not going to do it. There's only one way you can get out of it. And this is the message we have to give. And it's our pro-life message is utterly dependent upon it. And that is, we literally have to help people move to level 3 and 4. Because if you are living for the good beyond yourself, if you're making a list and literally putting down on that list, how can I make an optimal positive difference with my time and my talent and my energies to my family, to my friends, to my community, to my church if I have faith, to my, and you go down the line, to my society, to my culture, to my organization, to my employees. How can I make an optimal positive, how can I give the most contribution with my time? How can I make the world a better place for my having lived? If we don't do that, the comparison game, that level 2, it can just swamp us. It can take us over and can really plunge us into a kind of unqualified despair. And that is the point we need to bring, because it is not just ourselves. And it's not just the happiness of our friends. It is not just how debilitating level 2 can be when it's turned into an end in itself, but it's how debilitating it can be to the people around us and how debilitating it can be to the culture. A level 2 culture will feed on itself. It will stop at nothing to get what it needs to survive. A mere ego boost would be sufficient, and all of the good that is possible will be left by the wayside in an aggression and depression all at once, and inferiority and superiority all at once, mixed and commingled in a completely debilitating way, which will undermine the very progress that we could make and be hope for the world. Enough. You have to help people get there. And what are the consequences if we do? Euthanasia-wise, I don't have to tell you what the consequences are. It's very simple. Quality of life. No one in our nursing homes knows how to define quality of life. It's very minimal. Minimal. They have no paradigm to do it. Believe me, my parents have, gone through it. My grandparents have gone through this. Where you have to sit down and say, your level 1 and level 2 are going to go down quite a bit in this period of your life. Your tennis game's not going to be what it was. And your mental ability, in that same acuity is going to slow down a little bit. And you're not going to have the same ambulatory ability that you used to have. But it's okay, because you can love. It's okay, because this can be the most the time of your life where you can forgive the most deeply, reconcile the most deeply, impart the most empathetic gifts. Do you realize that empathy grows as level 1 and level 2 decline, or at least has the possibility to grow as level 1 and level 2 decline? It has a very good possibility to grow. And empathy is so genuine. It's so authentic. Little kids recognize it instantly. But not just little kids, big kids like me. I can see it too. And the key thing then is, as level 1 and 2 decline, the possibility for level 3 and 4 increase. Empathy increases, forgiveness increases, letting go of old debilitating fears, letting go of all the kinds of things that prevented us from an authentic relationship with even a child. And finally, of course, to make a long story short, and I'm sorry I got to run these questions here, faith. Boy, can the Holy Spirit use this. I mean, the development of faith, the development of level 4, the recognition of my own weakness, the desire to surrender to God ever more deeply. I think you know the possibilities. Where there's weakness, there's vulnerability. Where there's vulnerability, there's a possibility of letting go of everything debilitating and starting again. Where there's a possibility of letting go of everything starting again, there's a possibility of surrender. Where there is surrender, there is deep and loving prayer. Enough said. That's the possibilities. But you got to tell somebody. They got to know. And so I'm going to end on just simply this note. And the note is, it is my sincere desire that we're healing the culture. But it is my sincere desire that we bring this message to people. Because if we do, I think these issues of abortion and euthanasia are going to be treated and seen in a very different light. The very different light of higher viewpoints. The very different light of an analytical tool which will help them to see what is truly worthy of themselves and worthy of their love, worthy of the culture, and even hope for ourselves and hope for the culture to come. And that, in the end, will make all the difference. So thank you so very, very much.